everyone, I'm Victoria and welcome back. Today is Random Video Wednesday. We're going to be doing something a little different instead of just fun random things. I figure we're in the middle of a pandemic. Let's talk about the history of pandemics, part 1. I know this will probably be a little bit boring for some of you, but I'm actually curious and interested to see everything, so let's go ahead and get started.
Of pandemics.
This is part 1,
Part
by the way.
one.
They have 2 parts.
Disease. It's a terrifying prospect, but it has been part of human culture and of all life since the dawn of time. After all, bacteria evolved 3.5 billion years ago, and viruses 1.5 billion years ago, while we modern humans have only been around for 130,000 years. A myriad of infectious pathogens perpetually surround us, causing severe, mild, or even no reaction at all, depending on your health, immunity, and sometimes sheer luck. But when one of these diseases spreads rapidly, infecting thousands, it becomes an epidemic. And
aka COVID.
When it crosses borders to infect populations in multiple countries and across continents, you have a pandemic.
Aka COVID.
Epidemics and pandemics have occurred countless times in the past, infecting, injuring, and killing millions.
There's one in particular that I know a lot about. I don't know if it'll be in this one or the next one, but it's the Black Death or the bubonic plague. I know a lot about that, so hopefully we'll get to that.
They have changed many lives and the course of human history in countless ways. But in the end, humanity has always continued to move forward. And in many cases, we have learned from these outbreaks to develop new techniques of treatment and prevention. Additionally, we have made massive strides forward in sanitation, hygiene, and nutrition, making the human population healthier and less vulnerable to illness than ever before. Yeah. Let's look back at some of the...
Let's see. Nice. I know about some of these, like Spanish influenza, HIV and AIDS, Black Death, smallpox again, syphilis. I don't know about the 2 third pandemic things down here. Or the, I don't know how to say that, or the Antoine plague? I don't know about that. Or the plague of Justinia. Yeah, I don't know.
The worst diseases and pandemics in history. Smallpox. The viruses variola major and variola minor have been hitting humanity hard in devastating waves for most of human history. Smallpox has caused more suffering and death than any other disease. Mm-hmm. The virus is believed to have arisen in Northeast Africa about 10,000 years ago. It has been found in Egyptian mummies from 3,000 years ago, including Pharaoh Ramses V. Wow. Smallpox is mentioned in medical writings from ancient India and China in the same millennium, and killed at least 3 Chinese and 2 Japanese emperors. The virus is spread through the air via the coughing and sneezing of the infected, and causes fever, vomiting, mouth sores, and fluid-filled blisters.
So I knew the smallpox was a big thing, and everyone, it had come up a few times. Everyone knew about it. Everyone knows about it. I did not know, however, that it killed emperors or killed multiple emperors. And wow,
all
cool.
Over the body. It was
okay, maybe
in
not
about
cool.
30% of its victims, and those who survived were left scarred and disfigured by pockmarks and sometimes blinded. There are 7 known religious deities dedicated specifically to smallpox and protecting people from it, including Sapona in West Africa and Shitala Mata among the Hindus. In 1022 AD, a Buddhist nun in the Sichuan region of China noticed that those who survived smallpox were never reinfected. She ground up smallpox scabs and blew the powder up the noses of healthy people. And her unusual treatment worked. She had invented viriolation, Those she inoculated died only 3% of the time. Not ideal, but far better than the 30%
Yeah.
mortality rate of the full-blown disease.
Yeah, I mean, if you've got something, even if it kills less amount than the overall not helping them, I mean, it still helps that 27% that you could have died. And I believe that's one of the things with the whole vaccine currently is people are still getting it. Yeah, but I think less people are getting it than if you didn't get the vaccine. But that's all up to you and what you think. Get it if you want, don't get it if you don't want to. That's all up to what you think and what you want to expose yourself to and what you don't want to expose yourself to. And if you think you're going to get the virus by getting the vaccine, I mean, maybe, but I'm sure the symptoms will be less. So,
Knowledge of this life-saving...
I have gotten the vaccine, by the way. I have, as well as I don't think I've had COVID. If I did, I didn't know about it because I didn't have any symptoms. So,
treatment spread very slowly and was never able to outpace the infection, which had a habit of fading out and reappearing in lethal outbreaks around the world. Through most of the last 3,000 years, you had about a 1 in 3 chance of contracting smallpox in your lifetime. Unfortunately, we will be hearing much more from the terrible smallpox virus as we travel through history.
yeah.
The Antonine Plague.
I have no
This
idea what
scourge
this is.
first appeared among Roman soldiers as they held the city of Seleucia in modern-day Iraq under siege during the winter of 165 AD. From there it spread through the army and around the Roman Empire.
Lucidchart makes intelligent diagramming easy and helps your best ideas become real.
Symptoms included fever, swelling of the throat, diarrhea, and skin eruptions.
Hmm.
The underlying disease may have been smallpox or measles, both of which are airborne and spread by coughing and sneezing. At the height of the outbreak, 2,000 people a day were dying, totaling 5 million people, about 25% of the Roman Empire's population.
Ooh. And I would assume, especially at this time, that the Roman Empire was, it was everywhere. The Roman Empire took over most of, that part of the world. So 25% of the Roman Empire is a bunch of people. That's not just a tiny portion. That is a bunch of people, and I have a feeling that's why it's called a pandemic, because they did take over most of that area. It would have been into multiple different countries.
In the midst of the fear and chaos, many turned to magic for protection. Amulets were popular, and incantations were written above doorways to safeguard those who dwelt within.
I don't do incantations, but I love amulets. I like the crystals and stuff like that. So,
among the victims was the emperor himself, Lucius Verus. The plague was named after his co-ruler, Marcus Aurelius Antonius. Due in great part to the ravages of the plague, Marcus Aurelius's reign marked the end of the golden age known as Pax Romana, or Roman peace. The pestilence demoralized the population that had grown used to prosperity and stability, and the Roman Empire never fully recovered.
Yeah, like I said, I'm pretty sure that was in a time where they had already taken over most of the country, and 25% of the Roman Empire is a lot of people. It's hard to recover from losing 25% of your people if you've got the Roman Empire spread that far and that wide. Although I did not realize that would be... Is that considered the fall of the Roman Empire? Or... I don't know. Let me know in the comments below. I don't know if there was a different event or if that was the event that caused the fall of the Roman Empire.
The Plague of Justinian. 4 centuries later, and the Roman Empire had...
This is the Byzantine Empire, which again ruled most of that area. So
making way for the Byzantine Empire to dominate the Mediterranean. In
yeah.
541, the area was
Sorry, we're talking about plagues and
once again
Man,
slammed
allergies.
by a devastating disease. The first recorded pandemic of the bubonic plague, which would ravage Eurasia repeatedly for centuries.
That I did not know. I didn't know this was considered the first documented of the bubonic plague.
This outbreak is thought to have originated in the Tian Shan mountain ranges along the northwestern border of China.
Oh, okay, so I could see this being a thing. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. I could see this being a thing. It started there. The Roman Empire decided to move elsewhere, but by the time they fell by the Antonine plague, this had already gotten to that area, and when the Byzantine Empire started growing and started getting big, that's when this hit.
In this area, fleas carrying bacterium Yersinia pestis
Could be
infected
very
the nomadic
wrong.
Hun people, who frequently traded with and raided parts of the Roman and Byzantine empires. It is believed that the plague reached Egypt, where it was carried by flea-infested rats on board grain ships across.
That would make sense. That would be why it's considered the first part of the bubonic plague. Because in the bubonic plague in 1407, or first documented version, in 1407, rats were plagued with these fleas who had this disease, and because of that, it went throughout each country, starting in China, I believe. So
The sea to Constantinople, the capital city of the empire. There, large stores of grain were collected and held to feed the empire. Rats thrived in the granaries, multiplying themselves and the plague, which quickly spread among the human population. Symptoms included chills, malaise, fever, muscle cramps.
I'm sorry, I thought we were still talking about the other one. I guess that's why I guess the other one kind of goes into the bubonic plague. But yeah.
Seizures, gangrene of the toes, fingers, lips, and nose, and the most distinct symptom, painful lymph gland swellings called buboes in the neck, armpits, and groin.
So
Those
sorry. Yeah. The bubonic plague killed so many people. It was hard to even step here, there, outside your home in general without coming into contact with someone who had the bubonic plague, which is terrifying. I mean, COVID has not gotten to that point, thank goodness, but you could still step outside and be fine. Because there's a chance that you step outside, you're not going to come in contact with someone who has COVID right now. Where in this case, you step outside, there's almost a guarantee that you will come in contact with someone who currently has the bubonic plague.
Infected with bubonic plague had an 80% mortality rate, and death came on very quickly within 10 days of initial infection. The plague could also become airborne, causing lung infection known as pneumonic plague, which increased the death rate to 90%. And in rare cases, the bacteria could infect the blood, becoming septicemic plague, which was fatal in almost all cases within 24 hours of contraction.
Which is why it's considered the Black Death, because it killed so many people. I mean, you think about how many people were in England and, in Egypt and all these places that had the bubonic plague, and you sit there and you're seeing this and you have 80% mortality rate. Then if you think about the airborne illness of the plague, 90%, and then if it gets in your bloodstream, you're done. That is horrible. That is terrifying, and I can't imagine living through this and thinking, we just went through the worst time in history. There's a lot of people currently who think COVID is the worst thing in history. But yet you've got plagues like this and pandemics like this where you had no chance. People, there are tons of people who are living through COVID who can get COVID and survive. Granted, there are some that do pass away, but 100% of the time, you're not gonna die. Or, let me rephrase that. In this case, 100% of the time, you would die in this plague with it in your system. Meanwhile, COVID, you get in your system, you could have serious reactions, or you could not have serious reactions and go about your day 2 weeks later. Where in this case, it was almost always fatal if it was in your bloodstream. No, it was always fatal, and it always was in 24 hours, as she just said. So people thinking that COVID is the worst thing to happen to humanity, I don't think understand the concept of past pandemics and past plagues like this, because COVID is nowhere close to the size of this. Nowhere close to the size of the Black Death or bubonic plague. So, honestly, we kind of have it good as far as pandemics go.
5,000 people per day died.
I mean, you also have to think about, and we're going to be talking about this, and I'm sure they're going to talk about tuberculosis in the next one. But you have the Spanish influenza, which killed a bunch of people. And so you have these plagues and pandemics that kill all these people, but then you have COVID, who is, if you look at the statistics, is the minor out of most of these. So it's almost as if, not saying COVID is a good thing, but we got the good side of the deal as far as pandemics go. I mean, it's COVID in no way is a good thing, but compared to all the other ones out there, not necessarily as bad.
In Constantinople, totaling 40% of the city's population. Farmers in the countryside died en masse and left their fields fallow, causing the price of grain to skyrocket.
I don't know if it's going to mention this, but bubonic plague also took effect in animals. So you had it, your animals had it, which also brought on famine and stuff like that, which made it even harder to get better.
And famine to ensue. And there weren't enough laborers
so they did talk about
alive
it.
to keep the empire running as usual. Many blamed the plague on the emperor Justinian, calling him a demon. He himself contracted the disease, but survived. Others blamed his wife, Empress Theodora, saying this was punishment from God for her promiscuity. While probably not a demon, Justinian had overstretched the empire's funds with the construction of great churches, including the Hagia Sophia, and on wars of expansion. When the Justinian plague struck, it crippled the economy and the army, halting the growth and stability of the empire. Justinian moved quickly to enact new legislation to deal with the glut of inheritance cases, but he was powerless to preserve the peace. The social and economic impact of the plague was widespread throughout Europe. With the Byzantine army no longer keeping them in check, many other groups were able to expand and conquer, including the Anglo-Saxons who first settled in the British Isles during this time. The Black Death. Some 800 years later, in the mid...
So it did originate in Asia. I was a little off. Maybe 1407 is when it made its way to Europe. Yeah. Because for some reason 1407 and the Black Death come together. Maybe it was that. But yeah. Black Death, bubonic plague, pretty much the same thing. Actually, they are the same thing. It's just that was the first part of the bubonic plague.
1300s, the bubonic plague returned once more to decimate Europe and Asia. Climate change
This is the part when it gets even worse.
in Central Asia in 1338 caused rodents to flee dried out grasslands and move into areas populated by humans, where the fleas they carried spread the disease. The plague was then carried by traders along the Silk Road.
Yeah, see, it started in China, and then throughout China, it continues to the Middle East, India, Mongolia, Europe. I think Europe is 1407 is when it made its way to Europe
Where it
and was considered a plague.
devastated every place it went. India and Mongolia were left depopulated, and the Middle East was covered in dead bodies.
Yeah.
By 1343, the pestilence reached Crimea. There, the Mongol army had the city of Kaffa under siege. When Mongol soldiers died, their corpses were catapulted over the city walls in order.
I remember hearing about this when I was studying the bubonic plague, aka the Black Death. The Mongolians were so petty that they took the bodies because they wanted to take this city, this town, whatever. They were so petty that they put the dead people, their dead bodies, in a catapult and throw them over the wall so they could infect the citizens, so that way they would die and they could take those who lived could take the city.
In order to infect the people cowering within.
That's how
Genoese
petty they
traders
were.
jumped in their ships to escape the war and death in Kaffa, but they unwittingly carried deadly rats with them back home to Italy. From there, the disease launched its carnage of Europe, spreading north like wildfire. The population, already weakened by malnutrition, war, and other diseases, was massacred. The Black Death is estimated to have killed around 100 million people, between 30 and 60% of Europe's population, making this the most deadly pandemic in history. Infection and death were so rampant that corpses filled the streets as graveyards reached capacity and there was no one left to bury the dead. At least half of the populations of Paris and London perished. Smaller communities attempted to isolate themselves to protect against the scourge.
A lot of kingdoms, like the French courts, the Italian courts, and the English courts, a lot of those actually shut themselves up in their castle, refused to let anyone in and out, as for fear of killing the royal families at those times. So.
With varying degrees of success. The word quarantine emerged in Venice, referring to the 40 days ships were required to wait in the harbor before docking to ensure that no one aboard was carrying the plague. Many turned to God to save them in the already deeply religious era, and faith and obsession with death and the afterlife dominated culture and thought for centuries to come. Flagellants, a group of militant pilgrims, emerged primarily in Germany and Italy. They beat and whipped themselves publicly in punishment for the sins of humanity. When the Black Death finally ebbed, after the better part of a decade, those who survived faced a very changed world. Peasants found there was more demand for labor than there were people to do it. They abandoned the feudal lands that their families had been enslaved to for centuries, in search of better pay, and many of them got it, becoming wealthier than ever before. This infuriated the nobles, who saw themselves as inherently superior, so they imposed laws limiting everything from where peasants could live to what types of clothes they could wear. Peasants revolted, and thus began centuries of class warfare that would eventually culminate in the end of feudalism in Europe.
So, with the bubonic plague as a whole, with the Justinian plague, which was the bubonic plague. Now that I know, I didn't know that's what it started. But you had 80, 90, and 100% death. Then that rolls over into the 1300s, 1400s, and you get the same thing again, spreading even wider to other countries with a sometimes 60% chance of death. You already know this is a bad plague or pandemic because of what you can see from history from the original bubonic plague. But now you have it going everywhere, and it killed a ton of people. Like it said, 100 million people. It's one of the worst things we've ever had in the world as far as diseases. And people tend to forget that now, that it could be much worse. We could have lived in this time.
Kokolitsli.
I don't know what this
What
one
doesn't
is.
kill you makes you stronger. And in epidemiology, this is especially true. Those who contract an infection, mild or serious, will in most cases build an immunity to it. So if you survive,
They actually have that. I don't know. I think she's talking about like earlier, but it's still a thing now. That's why we have the flu shot or the chickenpox vaccine, because the thought is if you take a little bit, if you just have a little bit, not enough to infect you or anything, but just a little bit, you won't ever get it again. And in the case of the chickenpox, that seems to be mostly true, but sometimes with the flu, that's not quite true. I know I've had the flu multiple times, both with the vaccine and without the flu vaccine. So,
and are exposed
you're
to the
about
same
50-50
pathogen
on
again,
whether or not
your
it
immune
actually
system will
works.
know.
And that's what the whole point of the COVID vaccine is actually for. Even though people are terrified that COVID is in that vaccine, I'm not 100% certain that there is any type of COVID in that vaccine. I'm pretty sure it's literally just like something to get rid of any kind of symptoms for COVID, which helps you, even if it's something that gets rid of the symptoms of COVID. Because, I mean, even if you get the flu, you can't treat the flu. You can treat the symptoms, you can't treat the flu. So, I wonder if that's what they're doing with the vaccine. They're treating the symptoms to help bring down the death toll. Even though the death toll isn't as many as, the Black Death or bubonic plague, it's still there. People still die. It's just not as bad as some of these other plagues and pandemics that have been in history. So people, stop complaining that this is the worst thing in history. I've heard many people say this is the worst thing in history, COVID is. No, it's not. It's not even close.
How to fight back, and you will likely never become ill again.
It's still not good.
Until Christopher Columbus.
I don't know if it seems like I'm saying like COVID is a good thing. It's not. It in no way is a good. People are still dying. People still get sick, and people are still getting infected. It's just not as bad as other pandemics have been.
Landed in the Americas in 1492.
Oh, I'm so gonna get like
The
bitched
people
at in the
living there
comments.
had their own diseases and their own immunities.
I know
to
I
them.
am.
Their immune systems were not prepared for the onslaught of new.
If you guys bitch at me in the comments, that's fine. I don't care. Just don't expect a reply. Because I know what this sounds like. I know it sounds like... I know it sounds like I'm saying COVID is not that bad. And it's bad for now. It's bad in this time period. But if you just take a look at history, it's not as bad as some of the others. I hope that's what you guys are getting out of this, because I know you're going to bitch at me. I know you are. So, feel free to. Just don't expect a comment, because I don't want to try and explain it again.
Infections carried across the sea by Europeans. In the mid-16th
Plus, I'm worse at typing than I am talking, and I'm horrible at talking. So
15th century, an unknown pathogen was introduced by Spanish conquistadors, which obliterated much of the population of the Aztec Empire in modern-day Mexico. The viral hemorrhagic fever known as cocolitzli was likely related to the
Cocolitzli.
Ebola virus. Its symptoms
Ebola
included
virus?
a
Okay, that
black
makes
tongue,
sense.
bloody diarrhea, neurological disorders, and bleeding from
Oh.
the nose, eyes, and
Black tongue. Yeah, I know, I just looked at my tongue. Anyway, black tongue, that would terrify me just in general. Bloody diarrhea, again, kind of terrifying. Neurological disorders, I already had. Bleeding from the nose, eyes, and mouth, yeah, that. So, 4 symptoms I'd be terrified about having. One I already have.
mouth. An estimated 5 to 15
Probably-
million
Probably don't have it to the extent that they were having, but
people died, and many Aztec villages and cities were left abandoned. Spaniards saw the disproportionate infection of the Aztecs as God's punishment for their heathenism, but little record survives as to what the Aztec people made of this horror inflicted upon them. The massive loss of life did more to make way for the Spanish conquest than swords and muskets ever could. Conquistadors took advantage and claimed much of the land left abandoned by the Aztec people, ensuring the downfall of their empire. Smallpox.
we're
Again.
back to smallpox. I swear, smallpox, I don't think we'll ever get rid of. It's so bad. It
Cocolitzli
really
was certainly not the only disease Europeans shared with the inhabitants of the Americas. Smallpox was introduced to the Caribbean island of Hispaniola in 1509 and spread to mainland North America in the following year.
I was about to bring up the point of, yeah, smallpox is what killed some of the Native Americans. When the Pilgrims made their way to here, smallpox was one of the diseases that killed the Native Americans.
Because the
Because
indigenous
they didn't have the stuff that the Europeans did to help get rid of some of the symptoms, so they suffered and they went through what the first time the smallpox came through. They went through what they went through because they didn't have any knowledge of smallpox
population had
Or
no
these
acquired
other
immunity.
or these other diseases.
The disease wiped out thousands
Yeah.
with an 80 to 90% mortality rate.
Yeah.
As with the Aztecs,
I don't
disease
I
paved
don't
the
doubt
way
that.
for Europeans to colonize North America, and the infection of Native Americans wasn't always accidental. In 1763, during the French and Indian War, the British Army intentionally gave blankets which had touched the sores of smallpox victims to local tribe members in an act of biological warfare.
I could be mistaken, but I believe the reason for this was because the Europeans wanted the land that the Native Americans were on, and they figured if they all die, well, then we could take the land. Because they had, like I said, they had technology that the Native Americans didn't. And some Native American tribes now still aren't as advanced as some of the rest of society. So stuff like this would definitely kill most of the Native American population. And if I'm not mistaken, they did succeed. The Europeans did succeed because most of them died. And the ones that didn't moved away because they didn't have the numbers.
But Europeans didn't get away from smallpox scot-free.
Yeah, no.
For the better part of the 18th century, it was the leading cause of death worldwide. An estimated 400,000 Europeans died each year, and 1 in 10 infants in Northern Europe would die of the disease before reaching their...
This is going to be morbid. It's a morbid thought, but just looking back at the pandemics that we've seen so far, most of them lasted years. Some, like generations, and some, 10 years, whatever. We're in a pandemic right now. We're 2 years in? 2-3 years, something like that. I think it's 2 years. We're 2 years into this pandemic. We're going by past standards. We might be in this thing for a few years. I hope not. I hope we get out of this, like, this year. But theoretically, looking at past pandemics, they weren't just one year, 2 year pandemics. Epidemics, maybe. Pandemics, that's a worldwide thing, man.
Her first birthday. This terrible pestilence did not discriminate between classes.
No.
It killed
They never
Queen Mary
do.
II of England, her husband King William III, and her sister Queen Anne, as well as King Louis I of Spain and King Louis XV of France. George Washington survived a bout of smallpox in his early 20s, and Abraham Lincoln was in the early stages of the disease when he delivered the Gettysburg Address.
Oh,
Smallpox
nice.
infected and scarred Holy Roman Empress Maria Theresa and several of her 16 children, killing
Oh, gee.
4 of them.
Hold up. She had 16 children? Girl, what you been doing? Is it all by the same father?
The Empress decided to have all of her children inoculated against the disease, popularizing the life-saving technique of viriolation, which was first invented in ancient
That's
China.
terrifying.
At this time, doctors would take pus from an infected person's skin and use it to scratch the skin of a healthy person. 3% of those inoculated still died of the disease.
But 3% is better than 80, even 30%, like we saw. So, it brings up like I said, it brings up the whole, what they're talking about is a form of vaccine that we have now. Chickenpox vaccine. I'm sure it's probably about the same rate. Flu vaccine, again, probably about the same rate. If you just happen to be in that 3%, oh well. I mean, I hate it for you, but you did take all the precautions necessary. I mean, this is probably what they're going based on as far as the vaccine is that, or COVID vaccine is that, you know, it has helped in the past, especially with smallpox. So, let's see if it works again, kind of thing. It doesn't always help, doesn't always work. Like I said, that you still have that 30%, but 3% is way better than 80-90%.
But this was a big improvement on the 30% who
See?
died from actual smallpox.
Yeah, exactly.
In the 1790s, English physician Edward Jenner observed that dairymaids didn't get smallpox. He realized that this was because they had already been infected with cowpox, a virus that is related but significantly less severe and almost never deadly.
Oh my god, what? So cowpox and smallpox, they're related. I did not know this. They're related, and that's why they were affected with cowpox, and that's why they didn't get as bad as smallpox. Oh my
He
god, that
tested
is
his
so
theory
cool.
by inoculating his gardener's 8-year-old son with pus from a cowpox sore. The boy had fever for a few days and then recovered. Jenner then inoculated him with actual smallpox, and no symptoms developed. After more testing and significant skepticism and eventual acceptance by the medical community, Jenner's new vaccination replaced the more risky viriolation. After widespread vaccination campaigns throughout the 19th and 20th centuries, the World Health Organization certified smallpox, the most deadly disease in human history, as eradicated in 1979. Jenner is remembered.
That is so cool. I did not know that. That's how they got rid of smallpox. I was never sure. I just knew we no longer had it. It was eradicated or whatever. I didn't know that's how we
as
did
the
it.
father of immunology, and the basic tenets of his technique are still used today when
Yeah.
creating new vaccines against new diseases.
COVID
The
vaccine.
world no longer has to worry about the threat of smallpox.
Oh my god, that is
But
so cool.
unfortunately, there are still several more deadly diseases and pandemics
Yeah,
to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, there's a lot more to talk about, but that is so cool. I did not know that's how
including
that happened.
syphilis, cholera, the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic, and HIV/AIDS. Stay tuned for part 2 of a history of pandemics, and stay safe out there. If you enjoy
Anyway, that was the history of pandemics. Feel free to bash me in the comments because I made it sound like COVID was good, even though I am saying multiple times COVID is not good, just compared to other pandemics. It's the lesser of the pandemics that I know about. Anyway, that aside, let me know what you think about in the comments below. If you have facts on some of these things, please feel free to let me know. There was a few things that I was like, especially about the Roman Empire. I don't know if that was the fall of the Roman Empire or a different event had that happen. If you know, let me know in the comments. Or if you have any facts about anything else, let me know if you want to see part 2 to this as well. If you do, then I will try and do that in the next few videos or so. Let me know what else you guys want to see. If you have any suggestions, feel free to leave them. Please please like, subscribe, and follow. Yeah. Have a great and wonderful day. Bye.